That child isn't going to make it.
I was startled by the sudden words. What does she mean by not going to make it? It happened while I was on my way to a prenatal checkup, holding my full-term belly. An old lady, whom I had never met, said that to me as we headed to the waiting area of the hospital. I didn't know this person at all. I was already feeling anxious about the upcoming birth, and this old lady was saying something so insensitive. Deeply offended, before I could say anything, the old lady continued speaking.
At this rate, you're going to be raising that child on your own.
She said it calmly, as if she were making some sort of quiet prediction. That moment, the nurse came towards our direction. As I heard people moving towards the other rooms, my husband, John, suddenly popped into my mind. A sense of dread washed over me. I quickly went out and pulled out my phone to call him. Please, pick up. I waited, almost praying, until the ringing stopped.
Hey, what's up?
Relief swept over me at the sound of his familiar, calm voice, but it didn't last long.
Hey, sorry, but could you do me a favor and check around the house?
John was puzzled at first, but when I urged him, he seemed to catch on that something was off. I listened as he called out to his dad and headed outside, still on the phone with me. Holding my breath, I focused on the sounds coming from his end. After a while, I heard both John and his dad say,
"Oh,
at the same time.
who's out there?"
Then, I heard footsteps, followed by the voice yelling,
Wait.
as if someone was trying to run away. John must have been chasing after someone, as the only sound I could hear from his phone was the rush of wind. My name is Sarah Williams. I'm in my early 30s, married, and living with John.
Sarah, I bought some cake. Let's eat together.
Once a month, he stops by the bakery near the station and brings something home.
Ooh, blueberry cake? How cute.
It's a new one. I thought you'd like it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for everything.
We both exchanged embarrassed smiles and dug into the blueberry cake and cheesecake he brought home. We aren't particularly well off, but these little treats bring us so much happiness. Our story began back in high school. At the time, I had lost both of my parents in an accident and couldn't even attend school. I spent every day in tears. During those days, it was John who brought my school handouts to me. His family lived nearby, so he was asked to deliver them. There was always a little message scribbled in the corner of the papers he brought. Something like, "Wanna play soccer?" or "We're doing a juice stand for the school festival." Those simple little notes became something I looked forward to. Even now, whenever we talk about it, John gets a little bashful. Thanks to his support, I managed to graduate from high school. After that, we started dating, went to college, got jobs, and eventually got married. John's parents knew all about my situation, and they've always treated me like one of their own.
Sarah, if you ever need anything, just let me know, okay?
John's mom, Barbara, has always said that to me, whether I was a student or after we got married. His dad, Bob, is just as thoughtful. I feel so indebted to my husband and in-laws that I can't even begin to express my gratitude. It was in the summer a little over 2 years after we got married. I had been feeling unwell for days, and it had even gotten to the point where I was feeling dizzy.
Is this heat stroke?
Lately, the scorching heat had persisted day after day, with constant warnings about heat stroke. Still, something felt off, so I decided to go to the doctor. That's when I found out that I was pregnant. There was a new life, a new member of the family, growing inside me. The more I thought about it, the happier I became, to the point where I felt like skipping with joy. The sticker that read "Baby on Board," which I had only seen from afar, was in my hands. The day had finally come when I could attach one to my own car. I went home, still floating with happiness, and started preparing dinner while I waited for John to come back.
I'm home. Wait, did something good happen?
He noticed something as soon as he saw me sitting at the living room table. It was probably because I couldn't stop smiling. I whispered, keeping my voice low, and told him what had happened today.
Guess what? I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby.
What?
His eyes moved back and forth between my face and my belly, and they were glistening with tears.
We're starting a family. Can you believe anything could make me happier?
His voice trembled as he spoke, and I couldn't help but tear up as well, nodding along with him. We shared the happy news with his parents right after that. Even though it was over the phone, we all basked in that joyful moment together. Starting the next day, even with Gerald's demanding work schedule, he became noticeably more thoughtful, taking care to ensure I didn't push myself too hard. As my morning sickness worsened, I started spending more and more time lying down during the day, and it really worried John.
You don't look good. Let's move in with my parents for a while and get their help.
I wanted to say I was fine, but the truth was far from that. I was feeling anemic and unwell, and afraid that I might not even get to meet my baby if things continued. When we talked to Barbara and Bob, they kindly agreed without hesitation.
Of course, we'll help. Right, Bob?
Absolutely. We're family.
Even though I felt bad about it, John and I moved in with his parents. A month after we started living with them, something strange happened. One day, when I came back from a checkup, I saw graffiti on the wall of the house. At first, it looked like it had been done with chalk, and I assumed some neighborhood kids were just playing around. However, the situation worsened week by week, escalating to spray paint. Is this some kind of harassment? When I told John and his parents, they all looked confused.
For a prank, it's written unusually high up.
John is over 5 feet 9.7 inches, and the graffiti was at his eye level.
But there's no one in the neighborhood who would do something like this.
Despite keeping watch, the graffiti appeared at random times, with no witnesses in sight. We lived in a quiet residential area, so who could be sneaking around to do this without anyone seeing? The situation was growing more unsettling by the day. Then, one day, as I was feeling increasingly uneasy, I came home to find that my name and John's had been written on the wall.
How do they know about us?
I shuddered with fear. The thought of someone watching us, not knowing when or where, made me feel sick. I couldn't bear the thought of not feeling safe going outside, so I talked to John and his parents about it, and we decided to install a security camera. For the first few days, the camera showed nothing unusual, just our neighbors going about their daily routines. However, on the 5th day, we finally caught someone on camera. Early that morning, I woke up feeling restless from the heat and wandered over to the window. That's when I saw something move quickly near the house. Startled, I checked the footage from the security camera. It showed a man about 5 feet 9.7 inches, dressed entirely in black. He wore a cap pulled low over his eyes and a mask covering half his face. He was unrecognizable and unfamiliar. After quickly spraying graffiti on the wall, he left just as swiftly.
Who is that?
As I stared at the footage, confused, John came over.
It's hot. I couldn't sleep.
Though he had also woken from the heat, there was no time to focus on that.
Hey, come look at this. The camera caught a guy with a spray can.
John's sleepiness vanished as he leaned in, studying the footage. As the man walked away, John muttered that he thought he knew who it might be. He pointed to the way the man grabbed at the hem of his loose t-shirt and his medium build.
Could that be Jason? You remember Jason Cole, right?
Jason Cole. I repeated the name, trying to recall.
He lived next to us when we were in that old apartment, the guy who dressed like a musician.
Oh, that guy.
The word musician immediately brought it back. When John and I had just started living together, we rented a cheap apartment for a while. Our next-door neighbor back then was Jason Cole, and when we first greeted him after moving in, he seemed like a normal college student. He wore baggy sweatpants and often fiddled with the hem of his clothes. We once had a fight with him over a noise issue. The problem was his habit of blasting music early in the morning. Sometimes, just before dawn, he'd crank up the volume on rock music. It wasn't every day, but it happened often enough that John and I were losing sleep. We started going to work exhausted from the lack of sleep. Our frustration built up. Finally, John couldn't take it anymore and went to confront him. Jason got defensive immediately.
I want to listen to Summertime Blues, man. What's the big deal?
We're just asking you to turn it down.
That's not real rock, man.
And do you have to do it at the crack of dawn? This is disturbing the peace.
Rock is meant to be played early in the morning.
His argument made no sense at all. It was like he was speaking a different language. The way he was ranting and raving, he seemed more like a child, getting more worked up as he went on. He started yelling all sorts of insults, and soon, other tenants from the apartment came out to see what was going on. Telling him directly didn't make him listen. I had a feeling this would keep happening. The thought of it made me feel anxious and depressed about the future. We reached out to the management company, asking them to mediate. The next day, a middle-aged manager came to our apartment. He gave Jason a strict warning. His early morning noise was a violation of the rules, and if he couldn't follow them, he'd have to move out. After that, the loud music stopped completely, and we didn't hear a peep from him anymore. I suddenly remembered that incident as if it had just resurfaced.
But that was years ago.
It had been about 4 years since we moved out of that apartment, and I remembered Jason was still living next door at the time. His place wasn't far from John's parents' house, so he might still be living there. Could he be obsessed with us? If that's the case, will it stop at just spray painting? What if he tries to hurt me, or worse, our unborn baby? I couldn't stand the idea of living in fear and danger. When I expressed my concern, John nodded firmly.
Let's take this footage to the police. We can't wait until something happens to Mom and Dad.
That very day, we went to the police, explained the situation, and asked them to speak to Jason. The officer who helped us seemed a bit exasperated when he said,
Him again.
I didn't ask what had happened before, but I could guess. After that day, the graffiti stopped, and we never saw Jason on the security camera again. The police told us they gave Jason a strict warning to stay away from us and stop vandalizing the house. Barbara felt relieved.
Well, at least Jason won't be coming around to spray paint anymore, so we can relax for now.
Yeah, I guess so.
I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't entirely at ease. Was this really the end of it? A part of me worried that Jason might show up again after a few days, but as time went on, we never saw him on the camera.
Maybe I was overthinking it.
The graffiti incidents finally stopped, and peace returned to our lives, which allowed me to breathe a little easier. Months passed since the graffiti ordeal, and I was in the final weeks of my pregnancy. Thankfully, the baby was growing well, and the thought of finally meeting them made me excited. John and his parents could hardly wait either.
Maybe tomorrow's the day?
John teased, grinning. I smiled along with him. To be honest, I couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Would I be able to handle the pain of labor? Could I deliver the baby safely? What if the baby doesn't cry when they're born? Can I really raise a whole human being? The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became, and there were times I found myself crying alone in secret. One day, while I was waiting for my appointment at prenatal checkup, an old lady caught my eye. She was walking unsteadily in the hospital corridor. I didn't know her, of course. She was tapping the ground with her cane as she walked, as if her vision wasn't very good. I wondered if calling out to her would startle her. I hesitated, but when I saw her about to step into the staircase, I decided to speak up.
Excuse me, there's a staircase ahead.
To my surprise, the old lady didn't seem startled at all and stopped, saying,
Oh, is that so? Thank you.
As we tried to go back the way, out of nowhere, the old lady turned to look at me. She stared right at my belly for a good 10 seconds before saying,
That child isn't going to make it.
What?
I was startled by the sudden words. What does she mean by not going to make it? Before I could say anything, she continued.
If things stay like this, you'll end up raising that baby alone.
Just then, the nurse came towards our direction. As her footsteps faded, John suddenly came to mind. I pictured his playful smile in my head, but along with it came a flashing warning signal. I felt a sense of unease that I couldn't shake, and I immediately went out and called John. He was working from home that day, so he should have been at the house. The ringtone echoed in my ears. Please, pick up. I waited, almost praying, until the ringing stopped.
Hey, what's going on?
I felt a wave of relief at the familiar sound of his voice, but it didn't last long.
Hey, sorry, but could you check around the house for me?
Huh? What's this about all of a sudden?
Just hurry.
John sounded confused, but he must have sensed the urgency in my voice because he didn't question me any further. I listened as he called out to his dad, Bob, and the two of them went outside together, with me still on the phone. Holding my breath, I focused intently on the sounds on the other end of the line. For a while, I could hear John and Bob talking, but then I caught the sound of a quick, sharp.
Oh, who's there?
Suddenly, I heard the sound of running footsteps, shouting.
Stop.
It seemed like someone had been lurking around the house, and John and his dad were chasing after them. John must have been running as fast as he could. All I could hear through the phone was the wind rushing past. The sound of static, like a sandstorm, the rustling of clothes, and the pounding of footsteps. Finally, John seemed to catch up to whoever he was chasing, and the person's enraged voice rang out. It was a loud, aggressive voice that I recognized instantly, impossible to mistake.
I lost my job because of you. I won't forgive you. You think you can just live happily ever after?
A roar followed. Then the sound of something metallic clashing, along with shouts of,
Stop. That's dangerous.
All I could do was clench my hands in nervous sweat. There was also the sound of heavy footsteps, as if someone was grappling, and I tried desperately to figure out what was happening. The shouting continued, but I couldn't tell whose voice it was. Amidst it all, I heard a powerful, forceful shout.
Oh,
It all happened in just a few seconds, though it felt like minutes. I heard the metallic clatter of something falling to the ground, followed by the dull thud of someone collapsing. After that, there was silence on the other end of the line. What just happened? No one was saying anything. I couldn't make sense of it. Panicked, I shouted into the phone.
John? John? Answer me.
Finally, John brought the phone closer to his face, his voice breathless.
Sarah? Just now, Jason?
What?
It was Jason. He had a knife.
Catching his breath, he spoke to me in broken sentences. Jason had a knife?
Are you hurt? You didn't get stabbed, did you?
I'm okay. Dad managed to get the knife away from him and pin him down.
John tried to reassure me that everything was fine. Bob, who was usually gentle, was well known in the neighborhood as a tough taekwondo instructor. It made sense that he'd been able to handle the situation. John told me he was going to call the police, and then he hung up the phone. As I breathed a sigh of relief, I returned to the waiting area. It all felt like a strange daydream. Maybe Jason had been waiting for the chance to break into the house and hurt John. If that's true, it's terrifying. Perhaps the old lady's warning had prevented the worst from happening. In my heart, I quietly whispered,
Thank you.
Later that day, after finishing my checkup, John was waiting for me a few yards away from the house. As soon as he saw me, a look of relief washed over his face, and he ran toward me.
I'm so glad you're okay. Thanks for the call earlier.
He smiled as if nothing had happened, always putting me at ease.
How did you know?
Well, there was this old lady.
I told him about the old lady I had met earlier, and we both tilted our heads in confusion. We didn't have any blind relatives, and John didn't know anyone like that either.
Anyway, Dad and I are fine, and Jason's been arrested, so we can relax now.
But he knows our address, so who knows when this could happen again.
I shared my worries about the graffiti and how uneasy I felt staying in the same place.
Honestly, I want to move far away.
I wanted to give birth in a safe place and raise our child in a peaceful environment. I longed for a life where no one could threaten us. Tears of anxiety welled up in my eyes as I spoke, and John nodded.
I understand. We'll talk to my parents when we get home and start planning the move.
After explaining everything to his parents, they agreed, and as a family, we decided to move far away.
To be honest, we were a bit scared too.
Moving to a new place would take courage, but we felt it was the best choice. John's parents decided to sell their house, and we all started preparing to find a new home. I was full of energy and ready to help, but Barbara stopped me.
Sarah, you know better.
She reminded me not to carry or lift anything heavy, given my condition.
Leave all of that to us. You need to take care of yourself and the baby.
I was grateful for her kindness as I began packing my own things. While going through my belongings, I came across an old photo album of my late parents. It was covered in dust and the colors had faded. Flipping through the pages, I felt a sense of nostalgia looking at the grainy, retro photos taken on an old film camera. Suddenly, a photo slipped out from between the pages. The glue must have come undone. As I bent down to pick it up, I froze in shock at what I saw.
What? This can't be.
There, standing next to my parents holding newborn me, was the same blind old lady I had met earlier, smiling warmly. I flipped the photo over, and in my father's handwriting, it read, Sarah meeting her great-grandmother, Grace, for the first time. That lady was my great-grandmother.
But how could she still be alive?
I quickly grabbed my phone and called my uncle, Joe. After a few rings, Joe answered in his usual laid-back tone.
Hey, Sarah. Long time no talk.
I've got a question for you. Where is great-grandma Grace right now?
Grace? She passed away a long time ago.
His words hit me like a ton of bricks, bringing with them a wave of shock, disappointment, and regret. Had I really met the ghost of my great-grandmother at the hospital that day? Why hadn't she said anything? Why didn't she tell me?
I'm your great-grandmother, Grace.
While I was lost in thought, Joe began reminiscing.
It was a hot summer day. Even in her last moments, your great-grandma was worried about you, Sarah.
Great-grandma was?
Yes. It was right after your parents passed away in the accident. She kept asking, is she feeling lonely all by herself?
A wave of emotion rose in my chest, and I fought to hold back my tears.
But now, here you are, doing so well. I'm sure Grace is watching over you from the other side.
I nodded as I stared at the photo in my hands. Just then, I felt a little nudge from the baby inside me. That's right. I'm about to become a mom myself.
Yes, you're right.
I then asked Joe where my great-grandmother's grave was and told him.
Once things settle down, I'll visit.
That's a good idea. I'm sure Grace would love that.
After I hung up the phone, tears began to fall. My great-grandmother had been watching over me all along. Not just me. About my baby, and John too. Realizing the depth of her love, I cried big, heavy tears.
Thank you, Great-Grandma. I'll do my best to bring this baby into the world healthy and strong.
So, please keep watching over us. I looked at the photo of her and whispered. After that, we found a new house, and the move went smoothly. We settled in a community known for being family-friendly, perfect for raising children. Before I knew it, months had flown by since we moved. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and I was overwhelmed with emotion when I finally met him.
Sarah, thank you. And thank you, little guy, for coming into the world.
John was so overjoyed, practically dancing with excitement, that I couldn't help but feel both happy and a little embarrassed. After discussing it with John, we decided to name him Grayson, and since leaving the hospital, our lives had become a whirlwind. Everything was new, and we were figuring it out as we went.
I just changed you. Do you need a new diaper already?
Exhausted, I reached for another diaper as my son wailed. The constant crying was wearing me down, and I felt ashamed for not being able to find him adorable all the time. I knew babies cried, that was their job. However, when it happened so often, I couldn't even keep up with the housework or take care of myself. My confidence began to crumble. Maybe I wasn't cut out for motherhood after all. Thinking like that made me feel like a failure as a mother. It was Barbara who noticed my growing frustration and spoke up.
Sarah, you look tired. How about you take a little rest? I'll watch Grayson.
She smiled warmly at me as she spoke. Grayson kept crying, but the moment Barbara rocked him gently, he quieted down. There's no mistaking the skill that comes with decades of being a mom. Grateful for her offer, I decided to take a short nap. That evening, I sat in the living room with Barbara, sipping coffee. She explained that she had been worried as she watched me become more and more worn out from caring for Grayson.
You know, Sarah, you always try to handle everything on your own.
I hadn't realized it until she pointed it out.
We're here for you. Don't overdo it. Let's get through this together.
With those words, she gently wrapped her hands around mine, quietly encouraging me. Her hands were warm and soft. Can a mother really feel this dependable?
Thank you so much, Barbara.
From then on, I started leaning on her more. With her prompting, John and Bob also began pitching in around the house more. Thanks to them, I was able to focus on Grayson a little more easily.
Sarah, are we running low on diapers? Want me to go get some?
Oh, yeah. Could you?
John gave me a thumbs up. Quietly slipping out of the room, probably because he saw Grayson sleeping in my arms. I could only feel endless gratitude for my family's support with raising Grayson. It was still tough, but I was learning to face each day with determination. Time passed, and as parenting finally began to settle down a bit, John, Grayson, and I visited a church. John carried Grayson, who was in a particularly good mood that day. We had come to pay respects at Grace's grave, which Joe had told us about. When we reached the gravestone, we placed the flowers and prayed. The white lilies we brought stood tall, and a gentle breeze passed through the air. Grayson giggled with delight as the wind brushed past.
Great-Grandma, it's been a while. Thank you for everything that day.
Standing in front of her grave, I quietly spoke my words of gratitude.
I'm not alone anymore, so please don't worry.
There was no reply. The gravestone stood silently, and the only thing that passed was the quiet flow of time. Suddenly, Grayson began to fuss.
What's wrong? Maybe he's hungry.
Just as John moved to calm him down, a breeze swept through, gently brushing Grayson's cheek. He stopped crying immediately and stared at the grave with wide eyes. It felt as if Great-Grandma had answered. I couldn't help but feel that she was saying,
I'm always watching over you.